We'll call the meeting to order. Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting 157. Today, ethical aspects of artificial intelligence and algorithms. We have with us today as an individual, Brent Middlestat, Research Fellow, Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford, by teleconference. The Canadian Association of Radiologists. We have Nicholas Neumeyer, Chief Executive Officer, and Tang, Chair, Artificial Intelligence Working Group. Information Technology Association of Canada, Andre Leduc, Vice President, Government Relations and Policy. We do have some business to follow, so we're going to try and get this done as soon as we can. Giving you a full hour. We just had votes, our apologies on that, but something out of our control. But we'll start off right away with Mr. Middlestat. Go ahead for 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. So I have been researching the ethical challenges of algorithms and AI for nearly half a decade. And what's become apparent to me in that time is that the promise of AI largely owes to its apparent capacity to replace or augment any type of human expertise. And the fact that it's so malleable in that sense means that the technology inevitably becomes entangled in the ethical and political dimensions of the jobs, the practices, the organizations in which it's embedded. So the ethical challenges of AI are effectively a microcosm of the political and ethical challenges that we face in society. And so recognizing that, solving them is certainly no easy task. Now, I know from witnesses in your previous sessions that you've heard quite a bit about the challenges of AI. So dealing with things such as accountability, bias, discrimination, fairness, transparency, privacy, and numerous others. And all of those are extremely important and complex challenges that deserve your attention and really the attention of policymakers worldwide. But in my 10 minutes, I want to focus less on the nature and extent of the ethical challenges of AI and more on the strategies and tools we have for solving them. So you've heard also quite a bit about the tools available to address these ethical challenges, using things such as algorithmic and social scientific auditing, multidisciplinary research, public-private partnerships, participatory design processes, and regulations. And all of those sorts of solutions are essential, but my concern is that we're perhaps broadly using the wrong strategy, or at least an incomplete strategy, for the ethical and legal governance of AI. And as a result, we may be expecting too much from our current efforts to ensure AI is developed and used in an ethically acceptable manner. So in the rest of my statement, what I want to address are the significant shortcomings that I see in current efforts to govern AI, specifically through data protection and privacy law on the one hand, and through principled self-governance on the other. And so my principal concern here is that these strategies too often conceive of the ethical challenges of AI in an individualistic sense, when in fact they are actually collective challenges that require collective solutions. So to start with data protection and privacy law, responsibility far too often falls on the shoulders of individuals to protect their vital interests or their privacy, autonomy, reputation, those sorts of things. Data protection law too often ends up protecting data rather than the people the data represents. That's a shortcoming can be seen in several areas of law globally. The core concepts of data protection and privacy law, so personal data, personally identifiable information, and so forth, are typically defined in relation to an identifiable individual, which means that the data must be able to be linked to an individual in order to fall within the remit of the law and thus to be protected by the law. The emphasis on the individual is really mismatched with the capabilities of AI. We're excited about AI precisely because of its ability to find small patterns between people and group them in meaningful ways, and to create generalizable knowledge from individual records or individual data. In the modern data analytics that drives so many of the technologies we think of as AI, the individual doesn't really matter. AI is not interested in what makes a person uniquely identifiable, but rather what makes that person similar to other people. So AI has transformed privacy from an individual concern to a collective challenge, and yet relatively little attention is actually paid in existing legal frameworks to collective or group aspects of privacy. So I see that as something that really needs to change. And that shortcoming itself extends to the sorts of legal protections that we quite often see in data protection and privacy law that are offered to individuals and to their data. These protections are still fundamentally based on the idea that individuals can make informed decisions about how they produce data, how that data is collected and used, and when it should not be used. And so the burden is really placed on individuals to be well informed and to make a meaningful choice about how their data is collected and used. As is suggested by the name, informed consent only works if meaningful, well-informed choice is actually possible. And again, we're excited about AI precisely because it can process so much data so quickly, because it can identify novel and unintuitive patterns within the data and produce knowledge from them. We're excited because the data analytics that drive AI are so big, so fast, and so unpredictable. But the voracious appetite that AI has for personal data, combined with the seemingly limitless unpredictable reusability of the data, means that even if you're a particularly motivated individual, a well-informed choice about how your data is collected and used is typically impossible. So under those conditions, consent no longer offers meaningful protection or allows individuals to control how their data is collected and used. So moving forward in terms of data protection and privacy law in particular, I think we need to think more about how to shift a fair share of the ethical responsibility to companies, public bodies, and other sorts of collectives. Some of the ethical burden that's normally placed on individuals should be placed on these entities, requiring, for example, for them to justify their data collection and processing before the fact, rather than leaving it up to individuals to proactively protect their own interests. The second governance strategy that I want to address is one which has seen unprecedented uptake globally. To date, no fewer than 63 public-private initiatives have formed to determine how to address the ethical challenges of AI. Seemingly every major AI company has been involved in one or more of these initiatives and partnered with universities, civil society organizations, nonprofits, and other sorts of bodies. And more often than not, these initiatives produce frameworks of high-level ethical principles or values or tenets, which are meant to drive the development and usage of AI. The strategy seems to be that the ethical challenges of AI are best addressed through a top-down approach in which these high-level principles are translated into practical requirements, which will act as a guide for developers, users, and regulators. The ethical challenges of AI are more often than not presented as problems to be solved through technical solutions and changes to the design process. So the rationale really seems to be that insufficient consideration of ethics leads to poor design decisions, which create systems that harm people and society. So what these initiatives are producing are essentially self-regulatory frameworks which are not yet binding in any meaningful sense. And really, it seems like the blame for unethical AI tends to fall on, again, on the individual, so individual developers and researchers that have somehow behaved badly, as opposed to any sort of collective failure of the institutions or the businesses or the other types of organizations which are driving the development in the first place. So with that in mind, I'm not entirely sure why we assume that top-down principles and codes of ethics will actually make AI and the organizations that create it and use it more ethical or trustworthy. Using principles and ethics is nothing new. We have lots of well-established professions such as medicine and law that have used principles for a very long time to define their ethical values and responsibilities and to govern the behavior of professionals and organizations that employ them. If we can think of AI development for a second as a profession, it very quickly becomes apparent that it lacks several characteristics which are really necessary to make a principled approach actually work in practice. So in the first place, AI development lacks common aims and fiduciary duties to users and individuals. To take medicine as a counterexample, AI development doesn't serve the public interest in the first instance in the same sense. So developers don't have fiduciary duties towards their users or people affected by AI because AI is quite often developed in a commercial environment where fiduciary duty is owed to the company's shareholders. And so as a result, you can have these principles that are intended to protect the interests of users or the public coming into conflict with commercial interests, and it's not really clear how those are meant to be resolved in practice. Second, it would be that AI development has a relatively short professional history and it lacks well-established and well-tested best practices. There are professional bodies for software engineering and codes of ethics, but because it's not a legally recognized or licensed profession, professional bodies exercise very little power over their members in practice. And the codes of ethics they do have tend to be more high level and relatively brief in comparison to other professions. The third characteristic that AI development is seemingly lacking is proven methods to actually translate these high-level principles into practical requirements. The methods that we do have available tend to exist or have been tested really only in academic environments and not in commercial environments. And moving from high-level principles to practical requirements is a very difficult process. The outputs we've seen from AI ethics initiatives thus far have almost universally relied on vague, contested concepts like fairness, dignity, accountability, and there's very little offered in the way of practical guidance. And so disagreements over what those concepts mean really only come out when the time comes to actually apply them. So there's the huge amount of work we've seen to develop these top-down approaches to AI ethics have actually accomplished very little in practice. Most of the work remains to be done. And so what I would conclude with is that essentially ethics is not meant to be easy or formulaic. Right now, we too often think of ethics purely in terms of technical fixes or checklists or impact assessments, when really we should be looking for and celebrating these sort of disagreements, these normative disagreements, because they represent essentially taking ethical challenges seriously in a plurality of opinion that we should expect in democratic societies. And so really the difficult work that remains for us in AI ethics is to actually move from high-level principles down to practical requirements. And it's really only in doing that and in supporting that sort of work that we'll really come to understand the ethical challenges of AI in practice. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Middlestat. Next up, we'll have, I'm not sure which, is it Mr. Neuhammer, Mr. Tang?
Tang.
Go ahead for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je remercie les membres du comité permanent de l'accès.
I want to thank the members of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today about artificial intelligence in radiology, specifically in relation to ethical and legal issues in the implementation of this technology in medical imaging. My name is Dr. Anne Tang. I'm here. I work at the University of Montreal. I'm also representing the Canadian Association of Radiologists, CAR, and am the chair of the Artificial Intelligence Committee.
In radiology as it pertains to AI. The composition of this working group is varied from predominantly radiologists to physicists, computer scientists, and researchers. It also includes a philosopher specialized in the ethics of AI and an academic lawyer. Under the CAR's Board of Directors leadership, we have been entrusted with taking a global look at AI and the impact that it will have on radiology and patient care in Canada. I believe that I speak for most of my colleagues in thinking that this is a good news story and that AI can dramatically impact the way radiologists practice in a positive way. Through the collection of data and simulation, using mathematical algorithms, we can help reduce wait times for patients, thus expediting the diagnosis and positively affect patient outcomes. AI software analyzing medical images is becoming increasingly prevalent. Unlike earlier generations of AI software, which relied on expert knowledge to identify imaging features, machine learning techniques can automatically learn to recognize these features with the use of training data sets. AI can be used for the purpose of detecting disease, establishing diagnosis, and optimizing treatment selection. However, for this to be performed accurately, access to large quantities of medical data from patients will be required. This, of course, brings the privacy question into the equation. How do we collect this data while still guaranteeing we're collecting this information in an ethical way that protects the privacy of our patients? Because of the transition from film to digital imaging occurred 2 decades ago in radiology, and because of the availability of digital records for each imaging examination, radiology is well positioned to lead the development and implementation of AI and to manage associated ethical and legal challenges. La CIR croit que les avantages de l'intelligence artificielle pourraient excéder les risques.
The CIR believes that the benefits of AI can outweigh risks when institutional protocols and technical considerations are appropriately implemented to safeguard and remove the components.
That they are outpacing current radiology procedures. We need to establish regulations pertaining to data collection and ownership to ensure that we're safeguarding patients and not infringing on ethical or privacy guidelines. The CAR is advocating for the federal government to take a leadership role in the implementation of an ethical and legal framework for AI in Canada. Despite healthcare being a provincial priority, AI is a global issue. We feel the government is well poised to lead the provinces in the regulation of implementation of such a framework. Similar examples are the federal government's leadership in the National Medical Imaging Equipment Fund in the early 2000s. The CAR can help, and the AI Working Group, under the CAR Board's leadership, has published 2 white papers on AI, the first published in 2018 on AI in radiology, and which included a general overview of machine learning and implementation in radiology. And the second paper, published in May 2019, focused on ethical and legal issues related to AI in radiology. We have provided copies of the white papers with our recommendations for each of you. For the purpose of the discussion, I would like to highlight the more prevalent ones as they relate to the federal government's role in this capacity. First, implementation of a public awareness campaign regarding consent and patient sharing anonymized health data and harm reduction strategies. This information is essential for helping to identify disease and treatment for future AI applications. Second, general adoption of broad consent by default with the right to opt out. Third, developing a system for ensuring data security and anonymization of radiology data for secondary use and implementing system standards to ensure that this criterion is being met. Fourth, train radiology data custodians and establish clear guidelines for their role in the implementation of data sharing agreements for common AI-related scenarios and third parties. The CR is to work with the federal government and provincial ministries of health, including the Canadian Medical Protection Association, or CMPA, to develop guidelines for appropriate deployment of AI-assistive tools in hospitals and clinics, looking at minimizing harm and liability for malpractice for errors involving AI. We need to educate radiologists and other healthcare professions on the limitations of AI and reiterate the use of the tool in supplementing the work rather than replacing radiologists. AI is not going away. Sharing medical data is a complex issue that balances individual privacy rights versus collective societal benefits. Given the potential of AI in helping to improve patient care and medical outcomes, I believe we will start to see a paradigm shift from patients' right to near absolute data privacy to the sharing of anonymized data for the good of society. Nous devons travailler ensemble dans la mise en œuvre d'un cadre de travail afin.
We need to work together to implement a framework to ensure that we can move forward with this technology while respecting the patient's anonymity and privacy. AI in health care is going to happen sooner or later. Let's make sure it is implemented in an ethical way.
Either in French or English.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on next to Mr. Leduc. Go ahead for 10 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et chers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here today to present the perspective of our industry on behalf of the Information Technology Association of Canada, ITAC. Our association is a national spokes group for the industry, and we have over 200 small and medium-sized businesses in our organization.
There's a lot of promise and opportunity behind artificial intelligence to support economic growth, societal improvements, and the opportunities are seemingly boundless. From human mobility by automating vehicles to precision healthcare Many of our forthcoming solutions will be powered by artificial intelligence. And to realize the full benefits of artificial intelligence, we'll need to create systems that people trust. I've provided a brief outline of the slides that I'll present here today, including our industry's obligations and where our industry is already going, a call on our government to lead in terms of developing an ongoing dialogue via public-private partnership, the types of impacts that this will have on our workforce and the need for reskilling, upskilling, and training, and the recommendations in order to build trust in artificial intelligence. Canada has been recognized as a global leader in artificial intelligence research and development. We're attracting global talent to universities across Canada to study in this field. We're already experiencing the benefits of AI in a number of fields, from startups and SMEs to larger global tech companies, all of whom have developed AI systems to help solve business or some of society's most pressing problems. Many others are using AI to improve supply chain efficiencies, to advance public services, and to advance groundbreaking research. By leveraging large data sets, increased computing power, and ingenuity, AI-driven solutions can address any number of societal or business problems, from precision or predictive healthcare to automated and connected vehicles, improving human mobility, decreasing traffic, having an exponential impact on our environment. AI systems need to leverage vast amounts of data. The availability of robust and representative data, often de-identified or anonymized, is required for building and improving AI and machine learning systems. We can't understate this enough. Having access to broad and vast amounts of data is the key to advancing our artificial intelligence capabilities in Canada. That said, the AI ecosystem is global. It's very competitive, and it's multifaceted. Our association welcomes a multi-stakeholder engagement approach to artificial intelligence, one that encourages Canada to bolster global engagement on AI policy to ensure we are all prospering from the potential benefits for our societies. I'll note 6 key factors for the committee to consider. 1, traditional industries are already seizing and leading in AI opportunities, from oil and gas to mining, forestry, and agriculture. They are embracing this technology to drive efficiencies and compete on a global scale. They're developing new services and new products based on the information being analyzed and leveraging artificial intelligence. 2, AI is a journey. This isn't going to be an end state. This is going to be something that continues to evolve over the forthcoming decades. 3, central to any economy's digital transformation is cultural transformation. And misinformation in this space will kill consumer and citizen trust in new technology and artificial intelligence. 4, there will be workforce disruption. But based on historical factors, new technologies, including AI, we believe will create more job opportunities than it will kill. 5, we need partnerships for workforce development, including the reskilling and upskilling of existing people who may force disruption based on their current roles. And 6, next generation policies are needed. These are next generation technologies. It's time for us to start thinking outside of the box. When I first joined government in 1999, one of the first jobs I had was working to support the development of PIPEDA. I also was one of the lead architects of Canada's anti-spam legislation. I did my master's thesis on why SMEs struggle with compliance with CASL and PIPEDA. So I've been working on this for the better part of the last 17, 18 years. And it's interesting, we never foresaw the impact that data would have on our legislative frameworks that we have today. We couldn't foresee when developing Pipit or Castle the types of data-driven business that has come our way to date. Next, I want to talk about industry's obligation to promote the responsible development and use of artificial intelligence. One, we recognize our responsibility to integrate principles and values into the design of AI technologies beyond compliance with existing laws. While the potential benefits to people and society are amazing, AI researchers, subject matter experts, and stakeholders should continue to spend a great deal of time working to ensure the responsible design and deployment of AI systems, including addressing safety and controllability mechanisms, the use of robust and representative data, enabling greater interpretability, and recognizing that solutions must be tailored to the unique risks presented by the specific context in which a particular system operates. In terms of safety, security, controllability, and reliability, we believe technologists have a responsibility to ensure the safe design of AI systems. Autonomous AI agents must treat the safety of users and third parties as a paramount concern, and AI technologies should strive to reduce risks to humans. Furthermore, the development of autonomous AI systems must have safeguards to ensure controllability of the AI systems by humans, tailored to the specific context in which a particular system operates. 3, robust and representative data with a specific focus on mitigating bias. To promote the responsible use of data and ensure its integrity at every stage, industry has a responsibility to understand the parameters and characteristics of the data, to demonstrate the recognition of potentially harmful bias, and to test for potential bias before and throughout the deployment of AI systems. AI systems need to leverage large data sets, and the availability of robust and representative data for building and improving AI and machine learning systems is of utmost importance. By the way, this could be a significant competitive advantage for Canada. We have a globally representative population, including our Indigenous communities. It would be, for the medical field, a wonderful target for medical testing and AI testing in the medical field. In terms of interpretability, we should leverage public-private partnerships to find ways to better mitigate bias, inequity, and other potential harms in automated decision-making systems. Our approach to finding such solutions should be tailored to the unique risks presented by the specific context in which a particular system operates. And finally, the use of AI to make autonomous, consequential decisions about people, informed by, but often replacing, decisions made by humans, has led to concerns about liability. Acknowledging existing legal and regulatory frameworks, our industry is committed to partnering with relevant stakeholders to form a reasonable accountability framework for all entities in the context of automated systems. We believe we should leverage and build a public-private partnership that can expedite AI R&D, democratize access to data, prioritize diversity and inclusion, and prepare our workforce for the jobs of the future. ITEC members also believe that we need to prioritize an effective and balanced liability regime via the continued engagement of multi-stakeholder expert groups. The right solution is only going to come from an open exchange with all actors in the AI supply chain. If the value favors only certain incumbent entities, there's a risk of exacerbating existing wage, income, and wealth gaps. In this scenario, this isn't an us versus them, private versus public. It's just us, and there should be increased partnership to explore and how to develop a safer and more secure and trusted data-driven digital economy. There is a concern that AI will result in job change, job loss, and worker displacement. While these concerns may be understandable, it should be noted that most emerging AI technologies are designed to perform a specific task or assist and augment a human's capacity rather than to replace a human employee. This type of augmented intelligence means that a portion, but most likely not all, of an employee's job could be replaced or made easier by AI. Leveraging AI to complete an employee's menial tasks is a way to increase their productivity by freeing up time to engage in customer service and interaction or more value-added job functions. Nevertheless, while the full impact of AI on jobs is not yet fully known, in terms of both jobs created and jobs displaced, an ability to adapt to the rapid technological change is critical. We should leverage traditional human-centered resources as well as career educational models, and newly developed AI technologies should both assist in developing the existing workforce and the future workforce to help Canadians navigate through career transitions.
Mr. Leduc, you're 2 minutes over, so are you, we had 10 minutes for your presentation.
We'll just run quickly. I'll go to the next slide. You can see our recommendations here on screen around prioritizing Canada's competitiveness, promoting innovation and ethical AI practices, leveraging global standards, investing in AI R&D, balanced and flexible regulatory approach. And I think this creates an opportunity for us to marry privacy and cybersecurity. And in summary, many, if not all, of the uses of AI are going to rely on data, and in certain circumstances, personal data, and responsible use of that data is key. Burdensome regulation or reporting will limit the pace of AI innovations. We've got to get this balance right. Industry will follow the key principles of responsible use in personal data in AI. And we believe these principles are echoed in Canada's first ever digital charter, which we support as a foundational framework for launching an AI that is trustworthy, secure, ethical, and safe for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luke, and I apologize for containing AI into 10 minutes. It's more than challenging, I can imagine. Yeah, you did a pretty good job. Anyway, Mr. Saini for 7 minutes.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming here today. Mr. Tang, I'm going to start with you because very rarely do we have a medical practitioner. And as a pharmacist, I thought I would start with you first. You talk about the white paper that you produced, and one of the things that I found interesting, which I found even in my own practice, is the translational research component, which you've termed the valley of death because there's a lack of resources. How do we get beyond that problem? Because we might be able to create a great piece of equipment or a great piece of software, but to actually see it imposed or used clinically, that translation usually is very difficult. So what do you propose on a medical basis where we can get the benefit of all this technology, but actually apply it usefully to help patients?
Yeah, thank you for offering me the opportunity to answer. Serendipity has it that the federal government recently awarded a strategic innovation fund grant to a consortium led by Imagia Cybernetics, a Canadian startup specialized in AI and oncology, along with the Terry Fox Foundation, and along with academic radiology departments across the country, in partnership with the 4 top computer science labs specialized in artificial intelligence. So the goal over a 3 to 5 year period is to make sure that we harness the imaging data that we have, and we create new applications that can be used in academic departments prior to commercialization of these products down the road.
Mr. Leduc, if we look at the advent of artificial intelligence or the advent of technology, we are now into a different phase of human progress. Automation was created to do repetitive tasks where intellectual capacity was not necessarily required because the tasks were repetitive. We are now entering another phase of whether you want to call it industrialization or another phase in our economic growth, where now artificial intelligence has the ability to do intellectual tasks. So now because automation, repetitive tasks, now you're creating algorithms, you're creating artificial intelligence with machine learning, so actually the decision making is getting better. how do we deal with the fact that we will potentially have an underemployment of a class of people who are educated or trained to apply their intelligence to any task?
So there's a few things built into this. One is I think we're going to need to embrace lifelong learning. I think we are going to see the automation of a lot of menial tasks, a lot of repetitive tasks, and some human decision making. You will see, and we've seen it, going back in history over time to when we created the automobile the first time. We didn't need stable boys or stables for the horse and buggy anymore. In our own sector, we replaced operators who used to walk in front of the switchboard and switch everything. We replaced that with the router and switch. We do believe that the opportunity for these types of technologies to create more employment is going to outpace the disruption. That said, people who are in menial task fields are often the most vulnerable. And I think we need to embrace programming for reskilling and upskilling of people who are going to face displacement based on these new technologies. This is going to come. This isn't an option. Businesses will strive to become more efficient. They need to compete globally. If they can leverage AI to complete tasks within the enterprise, they will choose that because it will cost less.
So, one of the questions I want to ask, I'm sure you're all aware of the term singularity. And singularity can be contrived as a science fiction term, where eventually you may have overlords of machinery that control human beings. But let's take one step back from that point, and we look at artificial intelligence and we look at machine learning. The basis of that is to be smarter, more efficient, and more capable than human thinking. But ultimately, there still has to be a human component. If you look at technology the way it is, you can program it within a certain narrative, but there's also the human dimension that makes calculations as you go along. And one of the things that I read is autonomous cars. If you program it to go the speed limit, well, human beings don't always go the speed limit. So how do you compensate that? So my question is, if we look at singularity as the endpoint, how do we make sure that the human dimension is still involved? Because we want the advantages, we want the resources that AI and machine learning can provide us, but how do we make sure that there's still a human component to make sure that decisions are still being made in the human interest, or with human interest involved?
I can.
It's an easy question, 20 seconds.
Yeah. I highlighted it in our presentation is there still needs to be human control over all artificial intelligence. It has to be enabled by human control. And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of fear of the unknown in this space. But I think by developing, allowing industry to place the standards where there are market failures, creating the right legislative and regulatory frameworks to address those market failures are going to be important. What we as an industry want to see is an ongoing dialogue and a balanced approach to legislation and regulation. We don't say there is no need for it. We understand that, going through our own standard setting is not always the be-all and end-all, that sometimes there will be market failures that will require legislative or regulatory action. What we're suggesting is that this has to be done in a dialogue and be balanced so that we don't impede our access to innovation and our ability to do R&D in this field.
And just a final question. You guys can comment on the other question, because I want to make sure I get this question in. I mean, there has been some discussion philosophically that because the sort of global race for AI and machine learning, and some commentators have suggested that maybe we should take it one step at a time, because the research far supersedes any legislative ability. It supersedes any human comprehension of how to deal with the moral and ethical implications of AI. Would you suggest that we should have some framework where, as we hit certain milestones in the sort of progress of AI, that we should maybe take a step back and sort of regroup to think about how we're going to manage the next phase of development?
I'll go again on that one. And the problem that you run into is not everybody's going to play by the same set of rules. And this is like a global space race. Now we're in an AI race. Our country has invested a significant amount of time, money, and effort into being leading researchers in research and development of our algorithms and artificial intelligence, and we'll need to be able to commercialize that R&D and promote the use of our capabilities and capacities in AI. So whereas if we took that time to take a step back and review and took a couple of years to do it, we'd be just, essentially putting up a roadblock vis-a-vis our global competition in this space. So that's why we say I think this needs to be an ongoing dialogue. I think it's wonderful that you guys have brought this issue for study, but I think these types of issues around data and leveraging data and the privacy and what frameworks actually work now and what are the issues around consent, and we've been going through that through this committee. You've been doing this for the better part of the last 20 years. But to take the time to stop and review will impede our competitiveness.
Way past time.
Yeah.
So I have to go on. Thank you. I have to go on to Mr. Kent for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for adding a couple of new dimensions to the study that we've been doing on digital government, digital threats, privacy issues, and so forth. I'd like to start with Mr. Mittelstadt, Professor Mittelstadt, in the area of the vulnerability of massive amounts of highly personal data across society, medicine, health, and so forth, business, and regulation, liability and regulation. When the GDPR was brought in, the new spectrum of regulation brought in Europe with significant penalties for breaches or improper use of privacy, breaches of privacy. I'd like your comment on exactly how that has changed the development of artificial intelligence in its various applications, but also in the precautions that have been taken in various industries like the health industry, like social media on the other hand.
So I can say a few things. Thank you for the question. Largely, the impact of the GDPR is still uncertain because so much of it is sort of vague, or the actual requirements it imposes are not entirely clear at this moment. There are lots of complaints that have been filed at the member state level that are still being worked through by national data protection authorities. So we'll get some more clarity from that, and also as cases are brought in front of national courts and European courts as well. So there are very large fines. Data protection authorities are starting to use them. So I think we'll start to see what the actual impact is over the next 2-3 years in particular. In terms of how it's actually impacted on the development of AI, one of the effects I would say it's had, although arguably the 1995 Data Protection Directive had this effect as well, is to really encourage developers to anonymize or de-identify data before doing anything of interest in it with it, because as soon as that's happened, essentially the GDPR no longer applies. It applies to the de-identification process. It applies if you relink the knowledge that you create back to individuals, but it doesn't apply to anything that you do in the in-between stage. So that's one of the negatives I'd say it's had, but on a positive note, I would say it's encouraged more developers to consider how humans can actually be put into the loop in terms of automated decision making, because there are several rights that kick in for solely automated processes. So essentially AI that does not have a human in the loop to help make a decision or with the ability to intervene in a decision.
And the overriding element of consent would touch all of this, presumably.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, my comments on consent definitely apply here. And there are limitations in terms of how data can actually be repurposed. But again, these apply only to identifiable data. So they are limited in their applicability.
Monsieur Leduc, how would the Information Technology Association of Canada feel with regulations similar to the GDPR? Not necessarily exactly the same, but much more regulation than exists today in Canada.
So we follow this issue very closely. we've been reviewing the impacts of GDPR in the European context, the impacts that it has had, both positive and negative. Positive in terms of improving privacy rights for European citizens. The negative side, as my colleague pointed out, there's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of clear and simple guidance around how to comply. This is particularly impactful not on the largest organizations who have teams of lawyers to filter through the legislation and figure out how to comply, although it's a cost burden on them. It's particularly impactful on small and medium-sized enterprises, and we've seen a significant impact in the EU. We would caution, it's not that we wouldn't welcome GDPR-like principles brought into our digital charter and Canada's data strategy and improvements made to PIPEDA, but I would caution just turning the light switch on exactly GDPR as is. Now, that would make, for multinationals, it might make compliance a little bit easier because they're already GDPR compliant. But for SMEs, taking the leap from what is today PIPEDA and moving it into a GDPR-like framework without providing clear and simple guidance about how to comply with the law for an SME will have a significant negative impact on smaller and medium-sized enterprises.
In terms of discouraging research and development?
Not just discouraging research and development, it's the cost of compliance. We've seen reports coming out of the EU that the average cost is around $100,000 to comply with GDPR. And if you take that into account, that's not a lot of money for a very large organization, but for a small business of 10 people who has potentially $1 million in revenue, that would eat up essentially their entire profit margin at 10%. So and it was something I studied in depth over the course of about a year and a half. The lack of simple tools and compliance guidance for SMEs cripples their capability to comply with privacy legislation.
Okay. To Mr. Tang and Mr. Neuheimer now, and I consumed with interest the Who Are Radiologists page, and with regards to job loss, job transition, as a result of the development of AI in your field, in radiology, it would seem that you do have some concern about the fourth stage where the radiologist does analysis today and refers that analysis to a physician. If AI progresses to the extent that we're told it will one day, the radiologist job may be, and you tell me, but would seem to be reduced to the first interaction with a patient, taking those images, and then you'd be out of the loop because the doctor would be able to use AI to make the diagnosis and recommend treatment.
Mm-hmm. Now, to paraphrase, thank you for the question or comment. To paraphrase Mark Twain, I would say that rumors of our demise are vastly exaggerated at this point. At the CR, we've approached this question conceptually, and it also addresses the previous question. What are the various levels of autonomy of software? So we drew an analogy with the self-driving car, and we created a scale ranging from 0 to 5, where 0 indicates no automation at all, and then proceeds to physician assistance, partial automation, high automation, and full automation. We don't see on our radar anything that will replace the entire work that's accomplished by a radiologist. No. However, we see many helpful applications for specific tasks that are repetitive, mundane, and that would free us time to perform more meaningful tasks, such as communication, explaining procedures to patients, or even performing these procedures and attending tumor boards. So this would be much more productive of a time.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. We're way past time,
Thank
too.
you.
I know we can keep going. Mr. Boularice for 7 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to everyone here who has come to help us with this very important issue and study. We live in a world where artificial intelligence is going to increase in its implementation, and it will make more and more decisions that will be increasingly complex because there are algorithms that can make calculations at a very fast rate. I have a question, first of all, for Mr. Mittelstadt. My question is, since we want to talk about ethics in the artificial intelligence area. A super powerful computer does not have any ethical sense, but the designer, the builder of that does. And there can be aspects that deal with the collection, the processing, the handling of the data, and the algorithm could be asked to find answers in those areas. So how can, at the various stages, can human bias, which is quite normal, be prevented from affecting the outcome at the end? I don't know which of you would like to answer, Professor?
Yes, so happy to answer this. Thank you for the question as well. It's a very important question, how we actually both identify bias as it's picked up by algorithms and then how we mitigate it once we know that it's there. I think the simplest way to explain the problem is that we live in a biased world and we're training algorithms and AI with data about the world, so it's inevitable that they pick up these biases and can end up replicating them, or even create new biases that we're not aware of. We tend to think of bias in terms of protected attributes, so things like ethnicity, gender, religion, things that are historically protected for very good reasons. And actually what's interesting about AI is that it can create entirely new sets of biases that don't map onto both those characteristics and even onto characteristics that are human interpretable or human comprehensible. So detecting those sorts of biases in particular is very, very difficult and requires looking essentially at the set of decisions or outputs of a algorithmic system to try to identify when there is disparate impact on particular groups, even if they're not legally protected groups. Besides that, there is quite a bit of research and methods being developed to detect gaps in terms of the representativeness of data, also to detect proxies for protected attributes that may or may not be known in the training phase. So, for example, postcode is a very strong proxy for ethnicity in some cases. So discovering more sorts of proxies like that. Again, there's lots of types of testing, automated methods, auditing methods where essentially you are doing some sort of analysis of the training data, of the algorithm while it's performing processing, and of the sets of decisions that it produces. So there's no simple answer to how you do that, but there are methods available at all stages.
Merci. Monsieur Leduc.
Le professeur.
Thank you, Mr. Leduc. As the professor has indicated, there are often opportunities to influence the data and the codes that are used by artificial intelligence. What we recommend as an industry is to have reviews at each stage of development for artificial intelligence when the algorithm is being developed, for the gathering and analysis of the data. At every stage, there has to be a review to make sure that there isn't bias in the output that is derived from artificial intelligence. I have a related question, and any of you or all of you can answer. Artificial intelligence algorithms will make decisions that will have an impact on people, whether we're talking about police investigations, credit assessments, loans to companies, or hiring for somebody looking for a job. The algorithms will be used to help with making fair decisions. And the very principle about what is a fair and ethical decision varies depending on perspective. So how do we ensure we know what is such a fair decision? Who wants to tackle this?
C'est Monsieur le Professeur.
Perhaps the professor?
I'd be happy to give that a go. So I think as I was alluding to at the end of my statement, is that really what's going to be determined as fair or ethical is going to be extremely context dependent. I think maybe the sort of highest level we could go in terms of having guidelines for what constitutes a ethical or fair decision would be at a sectoral level, where you have existing regulation that tells you, that gives you some restrictions for what is considered legally permissible or discriminatory, because these things will vary across different sectors. So really, it's something that can only be answered at that contextual level. And I think maybe we have a head start in professions, in AI that will be used in professions that are already licensed or legally recognized as professions, where they have fiduciary duties to the people they serve, because again, they have these very long histories where they've developed sort of best practices, guidelines, and principles and lower level norms to tell, or basically to define what is a good behavior and what is a good decision. So it's a difficult question, but I think that's how we start.
Merci. Rapidement, Monsieur.
Thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Tang, would you like to answer? Yes, I would like to deal with both of your questions because I've had a little bit of time to think about them. Now, I work in the medical field. We need to have a very large amount of data so that we really reflect the population we're dealing with. We have to have men, women, and other groups well represented. The best way of reducing bias is to make sure that we have a human being in the loop, a doctor or whoever else would be appropriate, because there's a case-by-case approach in that way. Artificial intelligence data is based on a huge amount of data, but it has to be personalized.
In about 5 minutes, but we've just talked to vice chairs and all parties, and we're going to push that committee business to next Tuesday. So if you can stick around till 5 o'clock, is that something you can do? Okay, we'll take it right to 5 with questions, and away we go with Nate for 7 minutes.
Thanks very much. I wanted to start with you, Mr. Middlestat. I want to talk first about AI and risk assessments and algorithmic transparency. At the government level, there are now rules that the Treasury Board has put in place for government agencies and departments, and it's a risk assessment, and then depending upon how they answer the 85 questions, they're categorized between stage 1 to 4, and depending on where they slot in, there are mitigation measures that are then required. So perhaps explain the usefulness of that, if you think it's useful, the deficiencies of that, if you think there are deficiencies, how we can improve upon that potentially, and what else might be required.
So I thank you for the question. I tend to say that there is no single silver bullet for appropriate governance of these systems. So risk assessments can be a very good starting point. They're very good in the sense of catching problems in the pre-deployment or procurement stage. Their downfall or their shortcoming is that they're only as good as the people or the organizations that complete them. So they do require a certain level of expertise, potentially training, essentially people that are aware of potential ethical issues and can flag them up while actually going through the questionnaire. And we've seen that with other sorts of impact assessments, privacy impact assessments, environmental impact assessments, data protection impact assessments now in Europe. So there really has to be a renewed focus on the training of the people or the expertise of the people that will be filling those out. They are useful in a pre-deployment sense, but as I was suggesting before with biases, problems can emerge after a system has been designed. So we can test a system in the design phase, during the training phase, and say this seems to be fair, this seems to be non-discriminatory, this seems to be unbiased. But that doesn't mean that problems won't then emerge when the system is essentially used in the wild. So any sort of impact assessment approach has to be complemented by sort of monitoring, in-process monitoring as well, and also post-processing assessment of the decisions that were made, and really, very clear auditing standards in terms of what information needs to be retained and what sort of tests need to be carried out after the fact, again, to check for things like bias.
So that's helpful. So there's at least a model or template for algorithmic impact assessments that seems somewhat transferable, at least to the private sector, for bigger companies at a minimum. We've recommended that there then be a regulatory authority to conduct audits, not only as against that original assessment, but also potentially ongoing. Is that the kind of thing? There ought to be some regulator with the power to audit companies' practices who are engaging in the use of algorithms. Is that the idea?
It could be a regulator that does it. I watched Christian Sandvig's testimony to this committee, and he pointed out the difference between financial audits and sort of social scientific and computational audits. And I suppose it's more the latter that I'm thinking of here. So you can have a regulator do it, but again, that introduces the problems of, does the regulator actually have the expertise required? Do they understand the system that's being used? Do they have access to actually understand the system, what data it's considering, what its purpose is? So there are problems with relying solely on a third-party independent regulator. What I would actually like to see is more willingness, particularly from private companies, to share a bit more about not only the auditing that they're doing of their systems, in processing and post-processing auditing, but also just more generally the impact that ethical principles have had on their development and deployment of these systems. So in other words, I want to know a lot more about specific cases where they've said no or that they've changed the design of the system as a result of an impact assessment or as a result of auditing.
The lessons learned to date from big companies that do collect large amounts of data and then employ algorithms, that they're not implementing ethical principles in the first instance, and there need to be rules brought to bear?
I'll say it's not clear the extent to which they are implementing ethical principles. I know some companies that do have feedback mechanisms, but they tend to be more internal. They're very happy to report on sort of positive cases where ethical considerations have led them to change the system in a positive way or to design a new type of system. But in terms of public-facing, sort of very critical self-assessments, not a huge deal.
Sure, and what is the economic incentive for them to do that?
Well, in the first instance, you could argue that there is no economic incentive to do that because it can make you look worse than your competitors. Actually, one of my other slight concerns is that ethics turns purely into something that's marketable, in the same way that, say, having an organic label on your product makes it seem more ethical and more valuable. And I don't know. I'm very cynical about that happening.
Thanks. So obviously, I mean, whether you call it algorithmic transparency or algorithmic explainability, as the GDPR does, when some of us were in the UK and asking questions of the ICO, Elizabeth Denham, she said her role was to make the algorithm as explainable as possible, and then it was for other regulators, say Human Rights Commission and say the Competition Authority, to better assess with their expertise. Similarly, we had experts in the technical side of AI before us at the outset of this study who said transparency rules make sense across the board. Beyond that, you need sector-specific regulators and rules to apply that would simply take AI into account. Do you think that makes sense?
Again, if the sector-specific regulators have the necessary expertise to do so, and they're sufficiently resourced to do so, it could work.
Well, I think just to pick up on that, though, isn't then the point?
Sure.
So, say you take regulating the auto sector, for example, and they're employing AI for autonomous vehicles. I mean, do we have this standalone regulator, whether it's the ICO model or the Privacy Data Commissioner model, where we roll in algorithmic accountability into their function, or is it simply the regulatory authorities and the rules that are brought to bear on the auto sector have to account and build up capacity with respect to assessing algorithms?
Yeah, I can imagine the problem is I can imagine both models working. If there's openness to actually reforming the rules with the sectoral rules that the regulator is enforcing, I don't see any particular reason why it couldn't work. Again, assuming that there's sufficient expertise and resources available to it. At the same time, it does make some sense to have a general regulator, at least for certain types of issues. So the ICO, for example, is a data protection authority. Many of the issues with AI have to do with how data is collected, repurposed, and used. And so for those sorts of issues, it makes sense to have them deal with, the challenges of AI. But there will be other sorts of issues that are very specific to various sorts of AI, specific types of AI, where I think having the sectoral regulator deal with it makes more
Thank you.
sense.
Am I out of time?
We're way over.
All right, thanks very much.
So we'll go to Mr. Gord for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that artificial intelligence is going to play a key role in our economy. But the budgets that are going to come primarily from the private sector and part from the public sector don't always go to areas that are going to be helpful to society. So could we get an idea of how much intelligence, what the proportion of artificial intelligence is that's used in the military as opposed to other areas, that is for weapons and so on? The funds used in the military could be perhaps better used to help people in other areas of society. Now, of course, companies want to have contracts, and we're going to have a problem then around the world. I would like to have a reaction to that. Dr. Tang, Mr. Leduc, I don't think it would be really much different from the situation in traditional sectors when it comes to delivering products and services to the Defense Department in Canada or in other countries. We're talking about ethics and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence moves us forward in that our society can give its consent for the use of AI in some contexts and not in others. It can be leveraged to be used by the military for products and services. Perhaps we have those outside our country who want to interfere with ours. As far as the budgets are concerned, I really couldn't say. But even our Defense Department has to try to solve problems. And they have to use the tools that they are provided with, and artificial intelligence is an increasing part of our new technologies. So the technologies that are being developed increasingly include processes that use artificial intelligence just to have efficient products and services. I would also make a comment. Historically, Canada was on the cutting edge of basic research. We have the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, which enabled Canadian companies to really be at the forefront of innovative research and the use of AI. In addition, the federal government has provided funding for Apogee and other types of initiatives, including one that transfers fundamental research into applied research in marketing and a whole series of other areas, including health and commerce. So this means that academic research is being used to provide applied research, and that attracts more money. Could our other witness make a comment as well? The professor at Oxford, please. Professor Middlestat.
I suppose. Not specifically on the budgets, although I would note that in particular research on explainability or interpretability in AI, there's a huge amount of money going to it in the U.S. From the Defense Department. And what we've seen in the past, at least, is a crossover from military developments of technology into the private sector. Besides that, there is plenty of academic research and commercial research outside of the military context that addresses that. Beyond that, I don't know that I have much of a comment beyond that. In particular, not being extremely familiar with the Canadian context.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Gord. And last up for 5 minutes, Mr. Picard.
Monsieur Tang.
Dr. Tang, you mentioned earlier that the data can be anonymized. Is that necessary to protect individuals? And if so, isn't it a little bit counterintuitive because the data is anonymous, but we're dealing with an individual? Well, that question could be dealt with from another number of perspectives. We have to look at where anonymization is used. In a hospital, for example, there is information gathered, and it is anonymous, and therefore there is no breach of privacy. Only the treating physician knows the identity of the patient. Then there is research that can bring together data from a number of institutions. That way, the data can stay within the institution, and there can still be shared benefits among the institutions.
Not protecting people. Is that, did you say that we did protect data but not people, or we should protect data and not necessarily people because AI is what it's all about? Can you come back on this comment, please?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. The point of the comments was to say that data protection and privacy law are designed to protect people, or at least that's what inspired them originally, and to protect privacy in all its various different types. But actually, functionally or procedurally, what it ends up doing is protecting the data that are produced by people. And this links to the comments I was making around informed consent and to the need for identifiability for the law to apply in the first place. Because as has been described throughout the entire session today, once the data is de-identified or anonymized, you can still do very interesting things with it and create very interesting and useful knowledge about groups of people, which can then be applied back to those groups. In the case of medical research, it's very laudable, but in other cases, maybe not so much.
That suggests that we then have to find a way legally to not being able to separate data from the people. So when there's harm done to data, therefore there's an harm done to someone, because somewhere the data concerns someone, and you can protect someone, but you cannot sue a data. But data is the center of the focus. Do we lack something, legally speaking?
I'd say most places lack something, legally speaking. Dealing with the collective or group aspects of privacy and data protection is extremely difficult. There's not really a satisfactory legal framework for it outside of specific types of harms such as discrimination. So we could say we all lack something legally.
Monsieur Leduc, vous avez, à ma surprise,
Mr. Leduc, you mentioned to my surprise that everyone was caught off guard and didn't really understand the impact of all the data we have and the events that we've seen, all the influence that information has in our society. But we're talking about commercialization of data since Toffer and third wave and so on. So did we not have our eyes closed perhaps if we didn't see this coming? Well, we didn't really have our eyes closed, but we were developing legislation that was technology neutral, and there was no way to foresee the amount of data, the number of transactions that a person can do in one day. We didn't have smartphones in those days. As consumers, as citizens, we use our phones all day long, and so there is this interaction with the services, and we couldn't see that coming. In 2018, we produced more data than was ever produced up to 2017. So there really was no way. We knew that data had value, but in terms of the increase in development in the amount of data, given the interactions between consumers and businesses and
We're over time. I'll do. Yeah. I'm sorry, everybody. I know we could keep going on this. I think the conversation was another good one today of the really cool aspects of technology and where technology is going, but also the challenges of privacy and security, what Mr. Picard brought up today. So that's our challenge. Anyway, thanks for appearing, and hopefully we can have you back again to have a more fulsome discussion. We're adjourned. Thank you.